Content warning. This story contains themes of surveillance and manipulation that are acknowledged and resolved. The fork clattered against porcelain so loudly it might as well have been a gong, and Felicity Davenport wanted to disappear into the velvet cushions of her chair. She had been seated in this cavernous dining room for 20 minutes, surrounded by enough candelabras to light a cathedral, facing a man who looked carved from moonlight and ancient stone. His hair fell white as winter down past his shoulders, his skin pale enough to make the candlelight seem warm by comparison, and his eyes dark as a starless night had not left her face since she'd been escorted through the towering doors by a silent, unsmiling attendant. The table between them stretched long enough to seat 12, but only 2 places had been set, one at each end, as if they were dignitaries negotiating a treaty rather than 2 people attempting something as ordinary as dinner. Felicity had worn her nicest dress, a deep burgundy number she'd found at a consignment shop, and had even managed to wrangle her unruly brown curls into something resembling elegance. But none of that preparation had equipped her for this, for him, Nikolai Yennaris, the vampire king of the Eastern Dominion. She'd known what he was when she'd accepted the invitation, a formal card delivered to her apartment by courier, written in ink that seemed to shimmer under lamplight. The city's vampire population wasn't exactly a secret anymore, not since the Treaty of Coexistence had been signed 15 years ago, bringing the immortal courts out of complete shadow and into an uneasy peace with the mortal world. Still, knowing vampires existed and sitting across from their king were vastly different experiences. He hadn't spoken since welcoming her with a slight bow that had somehow felt more intimidating than warm. Servers drifted in and out like ghosts, placing course after course before them. Delicate soups, artfully arranged vegetables, slivers of meat Felicity barely tasted because her throat had gone tight with nerves. He ate nothing, merely watched her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Finally, as a dessert of spun sugar and berries appeared before her, Felicity set down her fork with more force than intended and met those ancient eyes. "I should probably tell you," she said, her voice too loud in the hushed room, "that I'm spectacularly bad at first dates." The silence that followed felt thick enough to drown in. The vampire king's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those dark eyes. Surprise? Maybe, or the ghost of amusement. Felicity felt heat crawl up her neck. Of course she would say something ridiculous. This wasn't even a normal date, it was some kind of formal audience, and she just, 4 centuries, he said, his voice low and textured like aged whiskey. Each word seemed carefully chosen, as if he were translating from a language older than English. "That is how long it has been since I last attempted this." Felicity blinked. "This? A date?" The word sounded foreign in his mouth, almost comical, except there was nothing amusing about the way he said it. His jaw tightened fractionally. "I confess I have no idea what I'm doing." Something loosened in Felicity's chest. She let out a breath that was half laugh, half exhale of relief. "Well, that makes 2 of us." For the first time since she'd entered the room, Nikolai Yennaris' expression shifted. The corners of his mouth didn't quite lift into a smile, but the severity in his features softened by a degree. He leaned back in his chair, a massive thing that looked like a throne, and regarded her with what might have been curiosity. "Tell me," he said, "what makes you bad at first dates?" "Where do I start?" Felicity pressed her palms against the cool table. "I talk too much when I'm nervous. I ask inappropriate questions. Last month I went to dinner with a guy from work and spent 45 minutes explaining the history of cheese making because I'd just watched a documentary and couldn't think of anything else to say. He never called me again." "Cheese making?" Nikolai repeated, and this time there was definitely amusement threading through his tone. "It's actually fascinating. The whole bacterial fermentation process." Felicity caught herself and laughed. "See, I'm doing it again." "I don't mind." He tilted his head slightly, a gesture that reminded her of a predator assessing prey, except somehow not threatening. Assessing, yes, but not with hunger. With something closer to genuine interest. 400 years is a long time to go without conversation that surprises you. Felicity picked up her water glass, grateful for something to do with her hands. Why so long? The question hung between them. She watched his face, the way ancient weariness settled over those aristocratic features. He looked perhaps 30 in mortal years, but his eyes held centuries. When you live as long as I have, he said slowly, you begin to see patterns, repetitions. Most interactions become predictable, tedious even. His gaze held hers. I stopped seeking companionship because I could no longer find anyone who felt real to me. Everyone became a type, a category, a role they were playing. That sounds lonely, Felicity said quietly. It is. The admission seemed to cost him something. He looked away for the first time toward the tall windows draped in midnight blue velvet. Beyond them, the city lights of the mortal world glittered. My advisors suggested strongly that I should try again. They arranged this evening. I suspect they doubt my capacity to connect with anyone anymore. There was something bitter in his voice, something that made Felicity's heart clench unexpectedly. She'd come here thinking she was the one who should be nervous, intimidated out of her depth. But the Vampire King looked almost as uncomfortable as she felt, just better at hiding it under centuries of practiced composure. For what it's worth, she said, you're doing better than the cheese documentary guy. At least you're actually listening. That almost smile returned, warming his features in a way that transformed him from forbidding to merely breathtaking. The standards you set seem remarkably low. You'd be surprised how many people can't clear that bar. Felicity found herself grinning despite the strangeness of the situation. Okay, your turn. What makes you bad at dates? Nikolai considered this, his long fingers pale and elegant drumming once against the armrest of his chair. I am told I'm too formal, too intimidating. I don't know how to engage in what you would call small talk. I've commanded armies and negotiated treaties between courts that have warred for millennia, but I cannot seem to master the art of casual conversation. Casual conversation is overrated, Felicity said. Most of it's just noise anyway. People filling silence because they're afraid of it. Are you afraid of silence? Usually, yes. Tonight? She paused, surprised by her own answer. Not as much as I thought I'd be. The Vampire King rose from his chair in one fluid motion, inhumanly graceful, and Felicity's breath caught. But he didn't move toward her instead. He walked to the windows, his white hair catching the candlelight like captured moonbeams. The formal black suit he wore looked both modern and timeless, tailored to perfection across shoulders that spoke of old-world strength. Would you join me? He asked, glancing back at her. Felicity stood on legs that felt slightly unsteady and crossed the distance between them. Up close, he was taller than she'd realized, and the air around him felt cooler, like standing near deep water. She stopped beside him at the window, looking out over the city she'd lived in all her 26 years. From this height, they had to be at least 20 stories up. In one of the old Gothic towers that dominated the historic district, everything looked small and distant. I forget, Nikolai said quietly, what it looks like through new eyes. It's beautiful, Felicity murmured. Then, because she couldn't help herself, do you miss it? Seeing things as new? Every day. He turned to face her, and the weight of his attention was almost physical. You asked earlier why I agreed to this evening. The truth is more complicated than my advisor's meddling. There's a rumor in the court that I've become too disconnected, that centuries have made me cold, incapable of the kind of feeling that makes a good ruler. They think if I cannot connect with my own subjects, mortal or immortal, then perhaps my time on the throne should end. Felicity's eyes widened. They can do that? Just remove you? With sufficient political will, anything is possible, even for kings. His voice held no self-pity, just weary acceptance. This dinner was meant to be proof, one way or another. Can the ancient king still feel something genuine? Or has he become the hollow figurehead they suspect? Felicity struggled for words. That's a lot of pressure to put on one dinner. Indeed. Nikolai's gaze hadn't left her face. I should not have told you. It's hardly fair to burden you with such knowledge. No, I'm glad you did. And she was, surprisingly. It made him more real, more than just the intimidating figure she'd imagined. So what happens now? Do you file a report card? Rate your feelings on a scale of 1 to 10? A sound escaped him that might have been a laugh rusty with disuse. Something like that, I imagine. Though I've never been entirely certain what my advisors expect. A declaration of instant love, proof that my heart still beats? He paused. It doesn't, incidentally, beat, not since I was turned, 5 centuries ago. Felicity looked up at him. She had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact and made a decision that probably qualified as the worst in a lifetime of questionable choices. She reached out and placed her palm flat against his chest, over where his heart would have been if he were human. Nikolai went absolutely still, vampire still, which was a different quality of motionlessness than human, like watching a statue hold its breath. Nothing, Felicity confirmed, feeling only cool skin through the fine fabric of his shirt. That's so strange. You're not afraid. He said it like an observation, but she heard the question underneath. Maybe I should be, she admitted, but you've been nothing but honest with me, and kind of sad if I'm being blunt, which I usually am. It's hard to be afraid of someone who's sad. Sad, he repeated, as if testing the word. His hand came up slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away and covered hers where it rested against his chest. His skin was cool but not cold, his touch surprisingly gentle for someone who radiated such controlled power. You see too clearly, so I've been told. But she didn't move her hand. Is that a bad thing? In my world, usually. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, a touch so light she might have imagined it. Tonight? No. Tonight it feels necessary. They stood like that for a moment that stretched, her hand over his silent heart, his hand covering hers, the city lights painting them both in amber and shadow. Felicity felt her own heart beating hard enough for both of them, a drum against her ribs that she was certain he could hear with whatever supernatural senses he possessed. I should ask you, Nikolai said, his voice rougher than before, about yourself, your work, your life. That's what one does on dates, isn't it? Usually, yeah. Felicity smiled. I'm a researcher at the city library, special collections mostly, old documents, historical archives, that sort of thing. I spend most of my time in climate-controlled rooms wearing gloves and trying not to sneeze on things that are older than the country. You preserve the past. I try to. She finally, reluctantly withdrew her hand. The absence of contact felt like a small loss. What about you? What does a vampire king actually do all day? I realize that's probably a stupid question. Not stupid, legitimate. He moved away from the window, gesturing for her to follow, and led her to a pair of chairs arranged near an enormous fireplace she hadn't noticed before. These chairs sat closer together, more intimate than the absurd dining table. I mediate disputes between the vampire courts, maintain the treaties with the mortal world, ensure that the younger vampires don't cause incidents that would reignite the hunts. It's bureaucracy and politics mostly, not the glorious kingdom you might imagine. Felicity settled into one of the chairs' deep leather that smelled of age and polish and tucked her legs under her. Sounds exhausting. It is. Nikolai sat across from her, and in the firelight he looked almost human. Almost. But necessary. Without structure, without law, our kind would tear itself apart. We're not gentle creatures by nature. Are you? Gentle, I mean. The question came out before Felicity could stop it, but she found she genuinely wanted to know. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those fathomless eyes. I try to be, he said finally, with those who deserve gentleness. But I've done terrible things, Felicity Davenport. I've made choices that haunt me even now. I won't pretend to be something I'm not. I'm not asking you to, she leaned forward, but you're trying. That counts for something. Does it? He sounded genuinely uncertain, and somehow that vulnerability made him even more compelling. Here was someone who commanded immortal courts and held the power of life and death, brought low by self-doubt. It was achingly human. Yeah, Felicity said firmly. It really does. The evening spun out like silk from that point, the awkwardness melting into something easier. They talked about books Nikolai had known authors she'd only read about in textbooks, had watched literary movements rise and fall like tides. Felicity told him about her work cataloging a collection of letters from the Civil War era, how intimate it felt to hold someone's words from a century and a half ago. He described the night the Treaty of Coexistence was signed, the fear and hope that had filled the vampire courts, the gamble of stepping into the modern world's light. Time became elastic. Felicity lost track of it entirely, aware only of his voice, the way he leaned closer when she spoke, the careful attention he paid to every word she said. No one had ever listened to her like this, as if everything she said mattered, as if her thoughts were worth the centuries of experience he carried. At some point, a server appeared to refill their glasses wine for her, something darker and thicker for him that she tried not to think about too hard. The server's face was carefully blank, but Felicity caught something in the brief glance they shot toward Nikolai. Assessment. Evaluation. A cold thread of awareness wound through her warmth. Someone was watching. Someone was measuring this interaction, judging whether the Vampire King could still feel, could still connect. She was part of a test she hadn't agreed to take. The thought settled like lead in her stomach, but she forced herself to push it aside. That wasn't Nikolai's fault. He'd been honest about the pressure he was under, even if he maybe hadn't spelled out exactly how closely this evening was being scrutinized. "You've gone quiet," Nikolai observed. Have I bored you? I tend to lecture rather than converse, an occupational hazard of immortality." "No, not bored." Felicity managed a smile. Just thinking, which is dangerous for me." "I like the way you think." He said it simply, a statement of fact rather than flattery, which somehow made it more meaningful. "You approach things sideways. You're curious about unusual details. Most people ask me about power, about supernatural abilities, about what it's like to be immortal. You ask me what I do all day and whether I still see beauty in the world." "The other stuff seems obvious," Felicity said with a shrug. "You're powerful. Anyone with eyes could see that. The immortality speaks for itself. I wanted to know about you." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the careful composure. He reached across the small space between their chairs and took her hand, cradling it between both of his with a reverence that made her throat tight. 400 years, he said quietly, his accent thickening with emotion. 400 years since anyone has made me feel like a person, rather than a position. I didn't think I could anymore. Feel this. His grip tightened fractionally. Interest, anticipation, the desire to know what you'll say next, what observations will come from that quick mind. Is this what they wanted me to find? Is this proof enough that I'm not hollow? Felicity's heart twisted. Because she was feeling it too, the connection, the spark, the sense that maybe she'd stumbled into something rare and real despite the absurd circumstances. But underneath it ran that cold current of doubt. Was any of this genuine, or was she just a prop in some elaborate court drama? A test subject to prove a king's humanity? "Nikolai." She started but stopped, uncertain what to say. He must have read something in her face because his expression shuddered, the warmth banking like a covered fire. He released her hand and sat back. "It's late," he said, formal again. "I should arrange for your transportation home. Thank you for your time this evening. You've been more than I hoped for." The dismissal stung more than it should have. Felicity stood, smoothing her dress, feeling suddenly foolish. What had she expected? A fairy tale? This was reality complicated and political, and nothing like the easy connection she'd imagined growing between them. "Yeah," she said, proud that her voice stayed steady. "Thank you for dinner. It was educational." Something flashed across his face, hurt maybe, or disappointment, but it vanished too quickly to name. He rose and offered his arm with old-fashioned courtesy, and she took it because refusing would have been awkward. His muscles were like cool marble under her fingers. He walked her through corridors lined with paintings of severe-looking ancestors down a sweeping staircase to a grand entrance hall where a car waited, engine purring. Modern luxury in a Gothic setting. The driver stood by the open door, patient and blank-faced. "Goodbye, Felicity Davenport," Nikolai said and released her arm. "Perhaps our paths will cross again." It sounded like a dismissal, a polite fiction. Felicity climbed into the car, settled into leather seats that smelled of expense, and didn't look back as they pulled away. She made it halfway home before the tears started. The library's special collections room smelled like old paper and preservation chemicals, familiar and comforting. Felicity had buried herself in work for 3 days since the dinner, cataloging documents with furious concentration, trying not to think about dark eyes and white hair and the feeling of a hand that held hers like something precious. She was failing spectacularly. "You look miserable," her colleague Marcus observed, dropping into the chair across from her workstation. "What happened? Did that mysterious date go badly?" "Define badly," Felicity muttered, making a notation about water damage on an 1870s land deed. "That bad, huh?" Marcus was 60, grandfatherly, and had worked at the library longer than Felicity had been alive. He'd also become something like a friend over the past 2 years. "Want to talk about it?" "Not really." She set down her pencil with a sigh. "Yes, maybe, I don't know." "That's certainly clear." Marcus leaned back, lacing his fingers over his comfortable stomach. Try me anyway. So she did, leaving out the specific details about vampire kings and political tests, but keeping the essential shape of it. The unexpected connection with someone she thought would be intimidating. The realization that the whole thing might have been staged. The confusion of not knowing what was real. Marcus said when she finished. The eternal question. Was I interesting for myself or for what I represented? Exactly. Felicity slumped in her chair. And I know it's stupid to be upset. I barely know him. It was one dinner. Feelings aren't logical, Marcus pointed out. If they were, my job would be much easier. You felt something real. That matters, regardless of the circumstances. Does it? If the whole situation was manufactured, was he honest with you? Felicity frowned. Yeah. He told me up front why the dinner was arranged. Then he gave you the information you needed to make your own choice. You chose to stay, to talk, to connect. Marcus shrugged. The setup might have been artificial, but what happened between you wasn't. That's the part you're mourning. When did you get so wise? Felicity asked, managing a watery smile. 63 years of making my own mistakes. He patted her hand and stood. Give it time. If it was real for you, chances are it was real for him too. The question is whether he's brave enough to admit it. The words stayed with Felicity as she worked through the afternoon, a small kernel of possibility that she was almost afraid to examine too closely. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe, excuse me, I'm looking for Felicity Davenport. The voice cut through the quiet of the archives, cultured and cold. Felicity looked up to find a woman standing in the doorway, striking, with white hair coiled in an elaborate style and skin pale as cream. She wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Felicity's monthly rent, and her eyes held the flat, ageless quality that marked her as vampire. Felicity's stomach dropped. That's me. Excellent. The woman's smile was all courtesy and no warmth. My name is Celestine Mordain. I serve as senior advisor to King Nikolai. Might I have a moment of your time? Every instinct screamed at Felicity to refuse, but curiosity won. She led Celestine to a small conference room, closing the door behind them. The vampire moved with that same liquid grace Nikolai had, but where his presence had felt like banked fire, hers was ice. I'll be direct, Celestine said, not bothering to sit. The dinner 3 nights ago was an evaluation, as you may have surmised. We needed to determine whether King Nikolai retained the capacity for genuine emotional connection. The results were mixed. Mixed, Felicity repeated flatly. He showed more engagement than he has in decades. However, there's concern about his judgment. Celestine's gaze was clinical, dissecting. You understand, of course, that you were never meant to be anything more than a test subject, a controlled variable. The king has responsibilities that supersede personal attachment. The words hit like a slap, but Felicity kept her expression neutral. Why are you telling me this? Because His Majesty has made several inquiries about you since that evening. He's distracted, unfocused. Clearly, the experiment has had unintended consequences. Celestine moved closer, and the air chilled. I'm here to offer you a considerable sum to disappear. Move to another city. Decline any further contact. Let him remember one pleasant evening rather than pursuing something that can only end poorly. Rage sparked hot in Felicity's chest. You're trying to pay me off? I'm trying to protect both of you from an untenable situation. You're mortal, fragile. Your lifespan is a heartbeat compared to his. Any relationship would be complicated by politics you cannot begin to understand. The courts would never accept a human companion for their king. You'd be in constant danger. Better to end this before it begins. Does he know you're here? Felicity demanded. Celestine's smile tightened. The king doesn't need to know everything. That's what advisors are for making difficult decisions, so he doesn't have to. Get out! Felicity's voice shook with fury. Get out of my library. Miss Davenport, out now, before I start screaming and security removes you. For a moment, Celestine looked almost impressed. Then she inclined her head, a gesture that managed to be both respectful and dismissive. Think about what I've said. The offer stands. She produced a card from her suit pocket, laying it on the conference table. If you care about him at all, consider what's best for his kingdom. Then she was gone, moving with supernatural speed that left Felicity alone in the suddenly too quiet room. Felicity stared at the card cream-colored, embossed with what looked like a coat of arms, and felt her hand shake. Part of her wanted to tear it to pieces. But another part, the part that had felt Nikolai's careful gentleness and heard the loneliness in his voice, wondered if Celestine might be right. What did Felicity have to offer a vampire king? She was nobody. A library researcher with student loans and a studio apartment. She couldn't navigate immortal politics or protect herself from the dangers Celestine had implied. Maybe the kind thing, the smart thing, would be to walk away. But then she remembered his confession. 400 years since anyone has made me feel like a person rather than a position. And she thought about someone making decisions for him, controlling his life, treating him like a chess piece to be moved around a board. Felicity grabbed her phone. She had to look up the number for the Eastern Dominion's public office. Apparently, Vampire Kingdoms had reception desks now, which would have been funny under different circumstances. The person who answered sounded bored until Felicity gave her name, then suddenly became very alert. "Please hold, Miss Davenport." Static hummed. Felicity's heart hammered. This was insane. She should hang up. She should... Felicity? Nikolai's voice, urgent and surprised and so familiar despite having heard it only once before. "Is everything all right? Are you hurt?" The genuine concern in his tone made her eyes sting. "I'm fine, but I need to talk to you, and I need you to tell me the truth. Did you send your advisor to buy me off?" Silence. Then low and dangerous, "Explain." So she did, relaying the conversation as precisely as she could remember it. As she spoke, she heard something in the background, objects shattering, someone shouting. When she finished, Nikolai's breath sounded ragged despite not needing to breathe. "No," he said, and the word held centuries of authority. "I did not authorize that. I did not want that. I have thought of nothing but you for 3 days, and the idea that Celestine would..." He cut himself off. "Where are you?" "Work. The Central Library." "Stay there. Please, I'm coming to you." "Nikolai." "Please," he repeated, and the please broke her. "Give me a chance to explain, to apologize, to..." Another pause. "I'll be there in 20 minutes." He hung up before she could respond. Felicity returned to her workstation in a daze. Marcus took one look at her face and wordlessly brought her tea. She sat clutching the warm mug, staring at nothing until the head librarian appeared looking flustered. "Felicity, there is someone here to see you. He's very insistent." Nikolai stood in the library's marble entrance hall like he'd materialized from another century, which in a sense he had. He wore all black shirt, trousers, long coat that swept around him like wings. His white hair was loose, falling past his shoulders, and his eyes burned with an intensity that made people step unconsciously out of his way. Several patrons were openly staring. Felicity walked toward him on legs that felt disconnected from her body. He watched her approach with an expression she couldn't read, tension radiating from every line of him. "Not here," she said quietly. "There is a courtyard." She led him through the stacks he moved with perfect silence while her shoes clicked against tile and out a side door into a small garden enclosed by the library's wings. Autumn had stripped most of the trees, leaving skeletal branches against a gray sky. They were mercifully alone. "I'm sorry," Nikolai said before she could speak. "Celestine has been removed from her position. The entire advisory council has been informed that any interference with my personal life will be considered treason. I should have anticipated this, should have protected you better. He stopped, hands clenched at his sides. "I handled everything wrong." "You didn't know she'd do that," Felicity said. "I should have. I know how they think, how desperate they've become to control me." His jaw tightened. "The dinner was arranged as a test, yes, but I didn't realize the extent of it until yesterday. There were observers throughout the evening, vampires with enhanced senses listening from other rooms, measuring my reactions, making notes. The entire thing was surveilled like an experiment." Felicity felt sick. "Everything we said was heard and recorded, yes." Shame colored his voice. "I knew the dinner was meant to prove something, but I didn't know they would violate privacy so completely. When I discovered it, I destroyed the records, all of them, and I made it very clear that such tactics will never be employed again." "That's why you shut down at the end," Felicity realized. "You knew people were listening." "I knew I was putting you in an impossible position. The more I felt..." He stopped, turning away. "The more genuine my reactions. The more I was giving them what they wanted, proof that I could still connect. But it stopped being about proof very quickly. It became about you, who you are, how you made me feel alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible." "Nikolai." Felicity moved closer, close enough to see the muscle jumping in his jaw. I need to know something. Was any of it real for you? Because it was real for me, and I need to know if I'm an idiot for feeling that way. He turned back to face her, and the raw emotion in his eyes stole her breath. It was the most real thing I've experienced in centuries. Every word, every moment, the way you challenged me, made me laugh, looked at me like I was simply a man rather than a monster or a king. I have not stopped thinking about you since you left, and I very much want to see you again, properly this time, with no one watching or testing or evaluating, just us, if you're willing. Hope fluttered dangerously in Felicity's chest. Your advisor said it could never work, that I'd be in danger, that the courts would never accept me. The courts can adjust, Nikolai said, steel entering his voice. I am still king. And if Celestine was right about anything, it's that the succession plan they'd arranged was sterile and loveless. They wanted me to choose some appropriate vampire, forge an alliance, produce an heir through turning rather than birth. A practical solution, a cold one. I told them today that I will not be following that path. Because of one dinner? Felicity asked, hardly daring to hope. Because of you. He took a step toward her, then stopped himself with visible effort. I am not good at this. At being vulnerable, at admitting that I want something beyond duty and tradition. But I want to know you, Felicity Davenport. The real you, in circumstances not orchestrated by scheming advisors. I want to hear you talk about cheesemaking and archival preservation and whatever else lights up your mind. I want to discover if this feeling between us is the beginning of something extraordinary or just the relief of two people who are equally terrible at dating finding each other. He paused, though I suspect it's the former. Felicity closed the distance between them, looking up into that ageless face. You dismantled your succession plan because of me? I dismantled it because it was wrong. You simply gave me the courage to admit it. His hand lifted, hesitant, and touched her cheek with devastating gentleness. I spent 400 years convincing myself I didn't need connection, that I was content with duty and power. 3 hours with you destroyed that lie completely. So, yes, I suppose you've upended my entire political structure. I hope you don't mind. She laughed, the sound breaking free like sunshine through clouds. I mean, that's a lot of pressure for a second date. Then let's keep the second date simple. The almost smile was back, warming his features. No palatial dining rooms, no surveillance, no advisors or tests or anyone but us. What would you like to do? Felicity thought about it. There is a coffee shop near the river. It's nothing fancy, just good coffee and terrible pastries and a view of the water. Very normal, very mortal. Perfect, Nikolai said softly. When? Are you free now? I know you probably have kingly things to do, nothing more important than this. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, a touch that sent warmth cascading through her. I have waited 4 centuries. I'm not inclined to wait any longer. So they went, Nikolai in his dramatic coat and Felicity in her sensible work clothes, walking through the city streets as afternoon faded toward evening. People stared he was impossible not to notice, but he seemed focused only on her, asking questions about the buildings they passed, the neighborhoods she liked, the way the city had changed in her lifetime. The coffee shop was called River's Bend, tucked into a converted warehouse with enormous windows overlooking the water. The owner, a cheerful woman named Rosa, took one look at Nikolai and nearly dropped her notepad, but professionalism won out. They ordered black coffee for Felicity, nothing for Nikolai, and claimed a corner table with a view of the sunset painting the river gold. This is better, Felicity said, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. Much better. Nikolai sat across from her, relaxed in a way he hadn't been at that first dinner. Still regal, still commanding, but more present. More himself, though I confess I have no idea what normal people talk about on second dates. Neither do I. I usually don't get to second dates. Felicity grinned. We're both making this up as we go. I find I don't mind that. He leaned forward. Tell me something about yourself that you didn't share before. Something real. Felicity thought about deflecting, making a joke, but his earnestness deserved honesty. I was engaged once, 3 years ago. We had the date set, the venue booked, everything planned. And then a month before the wedding, I realized I was planning a marriage to someone I didn't actually know. We'd been together for 4 years, but we'd never talked about anything that mattered. Never been vulnerable with each other. It was comfortable and safe and completely hollow. She met his eyes. I called it off. Everyone thought I was crazy. Maybe I was, but I couldn't go through with it. I'd rather be alone than with someone who didn't really see me. Nikolai was quiet for a moment. That took courage, or cowardice, depending on how you look at it. No, courage. His intensity pinned her. Most people choose comfort over truth. You chose truth. That's rare, precious. What about you? Felicity asked. 400 years is a long time. There must have been someone. Many someones in the early centuries, connections that felt real at the time but faded quickly. After a while, I stopped trying. He looked out at the river, profile sharp against the fading light. Vampire relationships are complicated. There are power dynamics, ancient grudges, political considerations, and mortal relationships. He stopped, and Felicity finished quietly, "You outlive them." Yes, the word was heavy with old grief. I watched friends age and die, watched civilizations rise and fall. After a while, investing in anything temporary felt pointless, painful, so I stopped. But you're here now, Felicity pointed out, with me, who is very, very temporary. I know. He looked back at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. But I find I don't care. Whatever time we have, whether it's years or decades, feels more valuable than an eternity of half-life. You make me want to be present, to feel things, to risk the pain of eventual loss for the joy of right now. Felicity's eyes burned. That's possibly the most romantic and depressing thing anyone's ever said to me. I'm out of practice. But there was warmth in his voice, affection threading through the words. Give me time. I'll try to be less doom-ridden. Don't change too much. I kind of like your doom. She reached across the table and he met her halfway, their fingers tangling together. His skin was cool but not cold, and his grip was careful, controlled, like he was always aware of his own strength. They stayed until Rosa politely informed them she was closing, the sky long since dark and the city lights reflecting on the river like scattered stars. Nikolai walked Felicity home through streets that felt safer with him beside her, his presence a shield against the November cold. Her apartment building was shabby compared to his Gothic tower, but he looked at it like it mattered simply because it was hers. At the door, Felicity turned to face him, suddenly uncertain. "Thank you," she said, "for coming to find me, for explaining, for this. Thank you for giving me another chance." He reached out, tucking a stray curl behind her ear with a gentleness that seemed impossible for someone so powerful. "May I see you again?" "You'd better," Felicity said. "I still haven't told you about the cheese documentary." That surprised a genuine laugh out of him, the sound rich and startled, like he'd forgotten he could. "Then I'll call you tomorrow, if that's not too soon." "It's perfect." She hesitated, then pushed up on her toes and pressed a kiss to his cheek. His skin was smooth and cool, and he went very still, like that small touch meant everything. When she pulled back, his eyes had darkened to something deeper than night. "Felicity." "Good night, Nikolai." She smiled and slipped inside before she could do something really crazy, like invite a vampire king into her tiny studio apartment on a second date. The door closed between them, and she leaned against it, heart racing, grinning like an idiot. On the other side, she heard his quiet voice. "Good night." Then silence, then nothing. But she knew he'd call, knew this was just beginning, and she'd never been more terrified or excited in her life. They fell into a pattern over the following weeks, building something real from the strange foundation of that first surveilled dinner. Nikolai called every day, messages throughout in-between texts that started formal and gradually loosened into something more natural. They met when they could, usually at places Felicity chose, bookstores and museums, quiet parks after dark when he could move without sunlight threatening, late-night diners where she ate terrible pancakes while he nursed black coffee and watched her with that focused attention that never wavered. He told her about his turning 5 centuries ago in a European kingdom that no longer existed, about the vampire who'd made him a queen, who'd seen potential in a minor nobleman and gifted him with immortality whether he wanted it or not. About the wars he'd fought and the courts he'd unified and the treaty he'd helped forge between their worlds. Not boasting, just sharing the weight of all those years. Felicity told him about growing up in the city, her parents who'd retired to Florida, her love of history and old things that had led her to library work. The small shape of her life compared to his vast one, but he listened like it was epic. asking questions about details that mattered to her. They were careful with each other, aware of the fragility of what they were building. But careful in a good way, the way you handle something precious. The kiss happened 3 weeks in, on a cold December night in the library's courtyard. They'd fallen into the habit of meeting there after Felicity's late shifts, and Nikolai had brought her coffee from River's Bend. Rosa had apparently adopted him, lecturing him about proper courting until he'd fled with pastries and promises to bring Felicity back soon. "She's terrifying," Nikolai said, handing over the cup. "How does a mortal woman make me feel like a scolded child?" "Rosa's special." Felicity sipped the coffee perfect with the amount of cream and sugar she preferred. He'd noticed. Of course he'd noticed. "She made you run errands. I'm impressed. She has opinions about proper dating etiquette. Many, many opinions." He settled beside her on the bench, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Apparently, 3 weeks without a kiss is ridiculous, and I'm being too much of a gentleman." Her words. Felicity's heart kicked. "Oh? I didn't want to rush you. Didn't want you to feel pressured." He turned to face her. "You've been patient with me as I remember how to do this. I wanted to give you the same courtesy." "What if I don't want courtesy?" The words escaped before Felicity could think better of them. "What if I've been wondering for 3 weeks what it would be like to kiss a vampire king?" Heat flared in his eyes, turning them molten. "Then I would say you should stop wondering." He moved slowly, giving her time to pull away, but Felicity was done with careful. She closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his with 3 weeks of anticipation behind it. Kissing Nikolai was like falling into deep water, cool and overwhelming and impossibly gentle all at once. His mouth moved against hers with centuries of experience but also hesitancy, like he was learning her specifically. One hand cupped her face, the other braced against the bench, careful not to touch her anywhere else without permission. Felicity made a frustrated sound and grabbed the front of his shirt, pulling him closer. He groaned an actual sound of surrender and deepened the kiss, still controlled but less careful. His arm came around her waist, and suddenly she was pressed against solid muscle and cool skin and the overwhelming presence of him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, well, she was breathing hard, he was faking it. Felicity felt dizzy. "Okay," she managed. "That was... yes." His voice had gone rough, accent thickening. "It was." They sat there in the dark courtyard, Felicity tucked against his side, his arm around her shoulders, neither speaking. The silence felt full rather than empty, comfortable in a way Felicity had never experienced before, like they could just exist together without needing to perform or explain. "I'm falling in love with you," Nikolai said quietly, startling her. "I thought you should know, in case that affects your plans." Felicity's heart stumbled. You can't just say that." "Why not? It's true." He looked down at her, firelight from a distant window catching in his white hair. "I've had centuries to understand my own heart. I know what I feel. I'm falling in love with you, Felicity Davenport, have been since you confessed to being terrible at first dates and made me laugh for the first time in decades." "I'm falling in love with you too," Felicity whispered, the admission terrifying and wonderful all at once. "Which is probably stupid because we barely know each other and you're immortal and I'm human, and there are about 1,000 ways this ends badly." He kissed her again, softer this time, a press of lips that felt like a promise. "Then we'll navigate those 1,000 ways together, as long as you'll have me." "Yeah," Felicity breathed against his mouth. "Yeah." "Okay." They stayed in the courtyard until the cold drove them inside, then walked through the empty library hand in hand, Nikolai marveling at the stacks while Felicity showed him her favorite sections. He was surprisingly reverent around the old books, handling them with a conservator's care, and they got distracted for an hour while he identified first editions and pointed out historical inaccuracies in various texts. "You're a book nerd," Felicity accused, delighted. "I've had 500 years to read," he said with dignity. "One develops opinions." It was nearly midnight when they left, and Nikolai walked her home as always. At her door, he kissed her goodnight, a slow, thorough kiss that left her knees weak, and promised to call tomorrow. "Nikolai," she said as he turned to leave. "Yes?" "I'm really glad your advisors forced you to go on that date." His smile transformed his face, making him look younger, lighter. "So am I, even if I had no idea what I was doing." "Neither did I," Felicity reminded him. "We're learning together. I find I like that." He kissed her hand, a courtly gesture that should have been ridiculous but was somehow perfect. "Good night, my love." "Good night." She watched him disappear into the night with supernatural speed, then floated into her apartment, already counting the hours until she saw him again. The confrontation came in January, 2 months after that first disastrous dinner that had turned into something extraordinary. Felicity was working late, cataloging a new acquisition of Civil War letters when Marcus appeared looking grim. "You have visitors, the fancy kind. They're insisting on seeing you immediately." Dread pooled in her stomach. "Let me guess. Vampires?" 3 of them. Very official looking, they made the head librarian nervous, which takes some doing. Marcus squeezed her shoulder. "Want me to stay?" "No, I'll handle it." Probably. Maybe. She had no idea. The 3 vampires waited in the conference room where Celestine had confronted her months ago. 2 men and a woman, all with that telltale pale skin and ageless eyes, dressed in formal attire that spoke of wealth and power. They stood when she entered, a courtesy that felt more threatening than polite. "Miss Davenport," the woman said. "Thank you for seeing us. I am Aurelia Sinclair, representative of the Northern Court. These are my colleagues, Lord Matthias Vaughan and Lord Christoph Unprusaniv-Thane. We serve on the Council of Elders." "What do you want?" Felicity kept her voice level. "To discuss King Nikolai's welfare." Aurelia's smile was all ice. "His recent choices have caused concern among the courts. Dismantling the succession plan, dismissing advisors, spending time with a human. You understand, of course, that this raises questions about his judgment." "His judgment seems fine to me," Felicity said flatly. "Does it? He's abandoned centuries of tradition, refused an advantageous political alliance." All for Aurelia's gaze swept over Felicity dismissively. "A relationship that will end in a handful of mortal years. Hardly the actions of a wise ruler." Lord Matthias stepped forward, his expression less openly hostile but no warmer. "We're not here to threaten you, Miss Davenport. We're here to ask you to consider the bigger picture. King Nikolai has responsibilities, duties. His infatuation, and I mean no offense, is clouding his priorities. He needs an appropriate partner, someone who understands our world, someone who can share eternity with him rather than a brief mortal span." "Someone you can control, you mean?" The pieces clicked together. "You don't care about his happiness. You care about maintaining your power structure." "We care about stability," Christoph said coldly, "about ensuring the kingdom doesn't fall into chaos because our king is distracted by a human. Your relationship is a liability, for him and for all of us." Fury ignited in Felicity's chest. "Get out! Miss Davenport, get out, or I start screaming. See how your vampire politics hold up against library security and cell phone cameras." She pulled out her phone pointedly. "I'm sure the media would love a story about vampire nobility harassing a city employee." The 3 exchanged glances. Then Aurelia inclined her head, the gesture somehow managing to be both respectful and condescending. "Think about what we've said. If you truly care for him, you'll do what's best for his kingdom." They left in a rush of cold air and expensive cologne, and Felicity sank into a chair, shaking. She should call Nikolai, should tell him what happened. But part of her wondered if they were right not about their motivations, but about the core truth. She was human, temporary. Maybe loving him was selfish when he needed eternity. Her phone buzzed. "Nikolai," as if summoned by her thoughts. "Dinner tomorrow? I have a surprise." She stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "We need to talk." The response came immediately. "That sounds ominous. Are you all right?" "Yeah, just, we need to talk. In person. Tomorrow, then. I'll come to you after sunset." Felicity set down her phone and buried her face in her hands. She loved him. God, she loved him. But was love enough when immortal politics and mortal lifespans collided? She didn't have an answer. Nikolai arrived at her apartment the next evening looking worried, a bouquet of winter roses in hand, deep red, impossibly perfect. He took one look at her face and set the flowers aside. What happened? So she told him. About the council representatives, their veiled threats, the arguments about duty and appropriate partners. About her own doubts, spoken aloud for the first time. He listened in silence, his expression growing darker by the moment. "They came here," he said finally, voice deadly quiet. "To your workplace. To threaten you." "They didn't threaten, exactly. They threatened." He paced her small living room like a caged predator. "They questioned my judgment, implied you're a liability. all because they're terrified of losing control. He stopped, turning to face her. I'm sorry. I should have anticipated this. Should have protected you better. You can't protect me from everything, Felicity said tiredly. And maybe they have a point. About some of it, anyway. I'm human, Nikolai. I'm going to age. Die. You'll be exactly as you are now, and I'll be gone. Have you really thought about that? I've thought of nothing else. He crossed to her in 2 strides, taking her hands. Yes, you're mortal. Yes, our time together is limited compared to my lifespan. I know that. I've always known that, and I don't care. But maybe you should, Felicity said, tears threatening. Maybe they're right that you need someone who can stand beside you for centuries, who understands your world. I'm just a librarian, Nikolai. I don't know anything about vampire courts or politics or, you know me. His grip tightened. You see me, not the king, not the immortal, not the monster or the legend, just me. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How precious? But is it enough? When the council is questioning your judgment and your courts are restless and stop. He cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. Let me be very clear. I love you, not the idea of you, not what you represent or what the council thinks you should be. You, Felicity Davenport, who talks too much when she's nervous and has opinions about cheesemaking and looks at centuries-old documents like they're love letters. You make me want to be present in my own life after 500 years of simply existing. That is worth any political complication, any amount of court disapproval. Do you understand? I'm scared, Felicity whispered. I'm scared I'm not enough, that I can't give you what you need. You already have. You've given me hope, joy, a reason to care about tomorrow. His thumb brushed away the tear that had escaped. But if you're having doubts, if this is too much, I'll understand. I won't force you into a life you don't want. Felicity looked up at him, this impossible, ancient, powerful being who'd chosen her for reasons she still didn't fully understand, who looked at her like she hung the moon, who listened to her ramble about archival preservation with genuine interest, who dismantled centuries of tradition because she'd made him laugh. I love you, she said, the words breaking free. I love you, and I'm terrified, and I have no idea how to navigate your world, but I don't want to walk away. Relief flooded his features. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like something infinitely precious. Then we'll face it together. The council, the politics, all of it. I promise you, Felicity, I will not let them hurt you, and I will not let them dictate my life any longer. She buried her face against his chest, breathing in his cool scent. What do we do? First, I'm convening the full council of elders tomorrow night. They need to understand clearly and unequivocally that my personal life is not subject to their approval. His voice held steel. Second, I'm making you a promise. I won't try to turn you into something you're not. Won't ask you to become vampire unless you genuinely want it, years from now. And I won't hide you away or keep you separate from my world. If you're going to be part of my life, it will be as an equal, as my partner. Whatever complications that brings. Felicity pulled back to look at him. Your council will hate that. Let them. His smile held teeth. I'm still king. They seem to have forgotten that. You're very sexy when you're all commanding and regal. That startled a laugh out of him. Only then? No, pretty much always, but especially then. She tugged him down for a kiss, pouring everything she felt into it, love and fear and determination and hope. He responded with matching intensity, arms tightening around her, and for a moment, nothing else existed. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder than necessary, Nikolai rested his forehead against hers. Stay with me tomorrow night at the tower. Let the council see us together. Let them understand this is real and permanent and not subject to negotiation. That's a bold move, Felicity said. I'm a bold king. He kissed her again, softer. Say yes. Yes, she whispered. Always yes. The council of elders convened in a chamber deep within the Gothic tower, a room Felicity had never seen before, all dark wood and stone, lit by candelabras that cast dancing shadows across faces both beautiful and terrible. Nikolai had dressed her in a gown he'd commissioned, midnight blue silk that made her feel like she belonged in a different century, and he stood beside her in formal black, white hair, braided back in a style that emphasized the sharp planes of his face. Felicity was absolutely terrified. The council members sat in a semicircle, perhaps 20 vampires of varying ages and apparent nationalities, all regarding her with expressions ranging from curious to hostile. She recognized Aurelia, Matthias, and Christoph among them. Nikolai's hand found hers, warm pressure despite his cool skin. "Honored council members," he said, his voice carrying authority that needed no amplification. "I've called you here to address recent concerns about my leadership and personal choices. Let me be clear. Felicity Davenport is my chosen partner. I intend to court her openly, include her in court functions, and eventually offer her the choice of joining me in immortality if she so desires. This is not subject to debate or approval." Murmurs rippled through the assembled vampires. Lord Matthias stood. "Your Majesty, with respect, you're asking us to accept a human in the highest circles of power. Someone with no understanding of our ways, our laws, our history. How can she possibly be appropriate for—" "I'm right here," Felicity said, surprising herself. "You could ask me directly." Silence. 20 pairs of ancient eyes fixed on her. Nikolai squeezed her hand once, then let go, letting her fight her own battle. Felicity took a breath. "You're right that I don't understand everything about your world. I'm learning. But I understand enough to know that this isn't really about whether I'm appropriate. It's about control. You've had centuries of managing your king, arranging his life, making decisions for him. And now he's making choices you didn't approve, and it scares you." "Presumptuous," someone muttered. "Maybe, but not wrong." She looked around the chamber, meeting those unnerving gazes. "I'm not trying to take anything from you. I don't want political power or influence over kingdom business. I just want to love him. And he deserves to be loved as a person, not managed as a symbol. If you can't see that, if all you care about is maintaining your own positions, then maybe you're not the advisors he needs." More silence. Then Aurelia rose, her expression unreadable. "You have courage, Miss Davenport, I'll grant you that. But courage isn't enough. You're mortal, fragile. What happens when you age and die? When he's left grieving? When the kingdom needs stability and our king is crippled by loss? Then you'll support him through it," Felicity said firmly, "the way advisors should, instead of trying to prevent him from feeling anything at all." "She's right." The voice came from the back, an older vampire, ancient even by their standards, with white hair and eyes that held millennia. He stood slowly. "I remember when our king was turned, 500 years ago. He was full of fire and passion and fierce determination to make something better of our kind. Over the centuries, we've slowly smothered that in protocol and tradition and political maneuvering. We've made him hollow. This human has given him back what we took." He looked at Nikolai. "Your Majesty, you have my support, and my apology for allowing this council to overstep so grievously." Another vampire stood, then another. Not all of them, Aurelia and her faction, remained seated, faces tight with displeasure. But enough. More than half the council, acknowledging their mistake. Nikolai's expression remained neutral, but Felicity felt the tension drain from him. "Thank you, Lord Dorian. The council will undergo restructuring in the coming months. Those who cannot accept my choices are welcome to retire from their positions with honor. Those who can adapt will continue to serve." His gaze swept over them all. "But understand this. I will not be managed any longer. I am your king, not your puppet, and my personal life is mine alone." The meeting dissolved into discussion after that, vampires clustering in groups, debating and arguing. Nikolai drew Felicity out of the chamber, through corridors lit by torchlight, until they reached a balcony overlooking the city. "That was remarkable," he said, pulling her into his arms. "You faced down the Council of Elders. I was shaking the entire time," Felicity admitted. "So was I." He kissed her forehead. "But we did it. Together. What happens now? Now? We live our lives, court each other properly, navigate the complications as they arise." He tipped her chin up. "And years from now, if you want it, I'll offer you the choice of forever. But only if you want it, only if you're sure." "That's a long time to wait," Felicity said softly. "I've waited centuries already. I can be patient for something this important." His smile was gentle. "Besides, I'm rather enjoying experiencing time with you. Watching seasons change, noticing the small shifts. I'd forgotten what it was like to mark moments rather than let them blur together." You're really committing to this whole romance thing, aren't you? Completely. He kissed her, then slow and deep, a promise of all the time they'd have. You told me you were bad at first dates, but I think we're getting rather good at everything that comes after. Felicity laughed against his lips. Practice makes perfect. Then let's keep practicing, for however many years we have. Deal, she whispered and kissed him again under the starlit sky, two people learning to love despite everything that should have kept them apart. Behind them, through the tower windows, the council continued their debates. But out here, it was just them vampire king and mortal woman, figuring it out together. Which was, Felicity thought, exactly how it should be. 5 years later, on a spring evening when cherry blossoms drifted like snow through the city, Nikolai took Felicity back to River's Bend. Rosa had closed the cafe early, leaving just the two of them and a table by the window, candles flickering between them. This feels familiar, Felicity said, smiling. It should. This is where we had our actual first date, the real one. Nikolai reached across the table, taking her hand. I've been thinking about that evening. How terrified we both were. How bad we thought we'd be at this. And now look at us. Only moderately terrible at relationships. She squeezed his fingers. I'd call that progress. I would call it miraculous. He stood, moving around the table with that fluid grace that still made her breath catch, and knelt beside her chair. From his pocket, he produced a small box. Felicity Davenport, 5 years ago, you made me believe in possibility again, in hope and joy and all the things I had thought I'd lost. I would very much like to spend the rest of your mortal life learning to be even better at this. And after that, if you choose it, I'd like to spend eternity continuing to learn with you. Will you marry me? The ring inside the box was stunning, a sapphire the color of midnight, surrounded by diamonds that caught the light like captured stars. Felicity stared at it, then at him, tears already streaming. Yes, she managed. God, yes, obviously yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, perfect fit, of course he'd gotten it right, and kissed her with 5 years of love and centuries of loneliness, finally fully healed behind it. When they finally broke apart, Rosa appeared from the back room, beaming. About time! I've been waiting years for this. Coffee's on the house for the newly engaged. They laughed, both of them, and Nikolai pulled Felicity into his lap, holding her like something infinitely precious, which she supposed she was to him. Just as he was to her, this impossible, ancient, wonderful man who'd learned to live again because she'd been brave enough to admit she was bad at first dates. I love you, she said against his shoulder. I love you, he replied. Thank you for taking a chance on a vampire king who had no idea what he was doing. Thank you for taking a chance on a library researcher who talks too much about cheese. He laughed, the sound rich and free, and kissed her again as spring blossoms drifted past the windows and the city lights began to glow. Somewhere, the vampire courts were probably having opinions about their king marrying a human. Let them. Nikolai and Felicity had spent 5 years proving that love was worth any complication. And they had a lifetime, maybe several ahead, to keep proving it, which was, they both agreed, the best kind of forever.